Hi, my name is Isabella Byrne Bellorín. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a woman and a mix of Venezuelan and Irish. Please do not call me Spanish or English. I'm not from Spain or from England, although I do speak both languages as a native speaker. My family is from Venezuela, the UK, and Ireland mainly. I speak Spanish and English as a native speaker, Catalan, pretty much native-like from school. I have fluent French that I studied at university. I'm just really into languages in general. This is what looking bilingual means to me.
Picture it. I meet you for the first time and I say, where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? And as directly as possible, okay, and I promise not to interrupt you like other people do, as directly as possible, what's the most complete answer for you?
I always begin with, I grew up in Barcelona because I really identify as a Barcelonan. And although I was born in Venezuela and my family is Venezuelan on my mum's side, I didn't grow up there, and while I have the culture, I do identify with it. So it's 1, I grew up in Barcelona. 2, I was born in Venezuela. 3, if people don't interrupt me, which you haven't so far, I've got a British passport, although my dad is now Irish because our family is originally Irish. His is the first generation people born English, meaning in England, really. But I never identify with English because of the whole UK and the 4 countries thing, and I never lived there. So I go with British because that's literally the passport paperwork. But yeah, I also identify as European and Latin American, and it's odd that way.
How is the concept of identity different for you, and how did it develop that way?
Well, something that I think about in terms of identity nowadays quite a lot is the idea of big identity and small identity. And as my big identities, meaning like the wider ones, seem so complicated at the moment, it's easier to identify with smaller things like my neighborhood, my own city, as opposed to a country or a nation or a whole continent. Although, there you go, I did mention European and Latin American at once. And that's pretty big.
What does that mean then when you say that?
Well,
just like imagine that somebody that didn't know what those things meant, how would you explain it to them?
both large identities encompass so many things. It's like I relate to some of the things in the large concepts of identity and not so many others. So by claiming them, but kind of going back, I seem to have a bit of more of control about how I'm perceived in relation to them.
I think it's something that's probably really difficult for people to wrap their heads around, especially if they have not met somebody that encompasses so many different places like you do, and that has had so many experiences and exposure to different cultures as you have. So this is really interesting, because the only reason I would have thought to have asked you this is because I experienced it myself. How can you best describe Latinidad in Barcelona, based on your experiences, of course?
For me, what comes with that is something warm, and it's a connection with home and family and community that varies. Now, I've been quite ambivalent about it at times, but I think it's just another way of adding to your circle of connections and this warmth. And you mentioned in your own presentation at times the whole slaves and molasses relation to your island roots. And I think there's something of that, of the whole coming together as a community. And whether it's because of a common interest that has nothing to do with nationality or origin, like music or theatre, or it's the shared experience of migration and of history and the whole atmosphere of it. I'm just thinking of the drums of the regional dances that all seem to have like the flowing skirt going around in pairs and the hitting of the floor rhythmically with your feet.
Yeah.
It's all of that, and it seems so intangible. So this Latinidad, something that really connects it is the language, mostly, well, Spanish, Latin roots, because of course, Latinidad includes, in this case, Brazil, which it doesn't always.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't
even
know that...
French Guiana, although it's vague.
I haven't even thought of that.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because it's part of like the Latin American languages in South America. But it's still part of like this combination of forced movement, slavery, and Europeans mixing with the locals, with the Native Americans throughout all of the Americas.
What does that look like in Barcelona?
In Barcelona, what I see a lot is shops and small communities, like small gatherings. Like I don't always relate to that. Like I see the Costa Ricans and with the hairdressers and the Dominicans in, you know, in my neighborhood, Pobla Sec, around Bly and stuff with their food, and being able to find cheap rice with plantain chips and frijoles. That's part of it, and I love it.
There's a lot of Venezuelans in Barcelona. I was actually really surprised when people would ask me about Latinos in Barcelona. I would always talk about, I'm like, you know, okay, so I see Cubans. I'm like, but Venezuelans, I see Venezuelans all over Barcelona. I'm like, it's crazy. I learned so much about Venezuelan culture from the folks that I met in Barcelona. Isn't that funny? More than I did here in the States.
I mean, and they've got like their own, they're so ingrained. It's like you get basic Venezuelan food in the most common supermarkets nowadays, in Latin American shops here and there. It's, well, the big brand supermarkets as well that are chains. So that's how ingrained this whole community already is.
This is something I was wondering, based on what we had spoken about before, based on the shared experiences that you and I have had, you know, being in Barcelona, although obviously you for a much longer time than me. So I'm curious, what is your perception of the differences between Latinidad and what you've just explained in Barcelona versus what you see in the States?
I think that one of the things that has happened is that the South American, Latin American presence in the States has been going on for much longer and has become more ingrained than it is in Spain still, because of the whole migration back to the metropolis from the old colony hasn't been as strong as going to chase the American dream that seems so closer geographically, especially. I'm thinking really historically nowadays, you know, like before the 50s, before planes became common.
Sure.
So it was easier to really to migrate and make yourself your own space in the US or Canada than it would have been to go back to Spain, especially like who would want to go to Spain at the time with the Franco dictatorship. So the attractiveness of Spain for migrants has really been a thing of, well, since the 80s, I guess, with becoming part of the European Union. We came here just before the Olympic Games in Barcelona. So that was also a moment of flourishing here. And I remember when we were beginning to study social sciences at school, that I actually looked up in like recent contemporary history, migratory movements and the tables of emigration and immigration to Spain. On the year that I arrived, migration was at a negative because there were more people migrating from Spain outside than they were migrating into Spain, you know? So it was a negative growth migratorily in 91, which has since changed, of course.
And I think that it must be really interesting for you kind of seeing all sides of it. You have your family, you have your friends that have arrived, you have your connection. What is that like?
For a moment right now, the only thing that I could think of is that when I went back to Venezuela, which I haven't been back to in 12 years, I had a great uncle who recently passed away, who used to call me Musiwa. So when I was in Venezuela, I was La Musiwa. It's a nickname in Venezuela for Europeans.
Wow.
Or
really?
La Catalana. Yeah. So, or las inglesas, because that's what made us different among our families.
How did it make you feel when they called you that? Did it make you feel more exotic? Did it make you feel like an outsider?
It was just an affectionate nickname. It's funny because that brings me to something that I'm quite curious about, that I hadn't considered talking to you about, which is in some Latin American places, it's quite typical that you have nicknames that might seem offensive to outsiders, but really aren't once you're inside. Like in this case, my own Musiwa, or when they call someone La Flaca or El Negro. Oh yeah, I have great uncles who are twins, and one is lighter color than the other. So they were Tío Blanco and Tío Negro. So yeah, because they're twins and one was lighter and one was darker, so that was their nickname, and it's just family things. You know that I have Black background, but like me, like my sister and my cousins, we don't particularly look it, but we share the same grandmother, and my mother herself identifies as Black partly, but a Ghanaian friend of hers here in Barcelona makes fun of her and says like, "Ay, se está desteñida."
Oh my God. Wait,
Yeah.
Can you say what is that in English, in case somebody doesn't understand?
Desteñido, okay, that you've lost your dye. Faded, yeah, faded black, yeah.
What the most important thing to me is highlighting like the lived experiences of different groups of people. So, you know, what is that? And, you know, how much a part of their daily life is that? And what's the experience overall as a being?
Being an English teacher and working in translation, among other things, and tourism and such. And my English is that of a native speaker, sort of, overseas, whatever. But I've also had it very academically taught because I chose to study at university. And it's what you sound like. And of course, being a native English speaker sells in the TEFL market. Yeah. And my surname and my passport is part of like the presentation card for that, as well as my accent.
Yeah.
So it's a part of my identity, but it doesn't feel like it's one that I relate to so much in terms of the country, but it's something that I really do use. When I speak Spanish, I feel like I don't have a very marketable accent. Like I know I'm a native speaker, and the thing is, I don't have the accent that is commonly heard in media at all. It's something like mid-Atlantic, I call it, because it has remnants of Venezuelan accent, and it has lots of things that are Spanish. And something I tend to do is simply chameleon my way into the way that the people around me are speaking, and never quite managing to hold an accent.
That's such a strength and such a superpower. You know, somebody like you is out there, you know, in all your talented self and all your, you know, your delicious background and all that jazz, as it were. And that's a gift, and it's a superpower. It really is.